The night Sterling moved into room 404, Knox slammed his hand on the desk and said, "The floor lead position should be rotated." Miles nodded along like a puppet. Sterling leaned back in his chair, a harmless smile plastered on his face. I pulled the dorm key from my pocket and tossed it onto the table. "Fine by me," I said. They froze. I could tell they had a whole speech prepared as some crap about fairness and democracy, and everyone having a voice. But I didn't even give them the chance to start. The key spun twice on the wood and came to a dead stop. I slept better than ever that night. They had no idea what was tucked away in my desk drawer. It was a full-ride PhD offer from MIT's computer science department. It had arrived 3 days ago. On the third day of junior year, the department advisor sent a message to our group chat. "Sterling Vance from the business school is moving into 404. His building has a pipe burst, so he's being temporarily reassigned to your room." Knox practically leaped off his bed. Sterling Vance? The VP of the student government? I heard his dad donated an entire research wing to the university. Miles looked up from his stack of literature books. He was usually quiet, but his eyes lit up at the mention of a big shot. His dad's company sponsored the Centennial Gala last semester. Sterling gave the keynote speech with the university president sitting right behind him. I didn't say a word. I just kept tweaking the parameters of my AI model. At 3 in the afternoon, Sterling dragged a designer Rimawa suitcase through the door. He was over 6 feet tall, wearing a crisp gray polo, with every hair on his head perfectly in place. The first thing he did wasn't to unpack. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a stack of gold-embossed business cards, and handed them out. "You must be Silas, right?" The gold-edged card landed next to my keyboard. "I've heard a lot about you. The coding genius of the CS department. 2 top-tier conference papers already, you're the local legend." His words were smooth. But as he said legend, his eyes flickered toward Knox and Miles. It was a clear move. He was setting me up on a pedestal. If I gave him any attitude now, I'd look like a prick. "Appreciate it," I said, sliding the card to the side. "Your bed is the top bunk by the window. It's empty." "Got it." He turned around. "Hey Knox, mind giving me a hand with this?" He was already on a first-name basis. Knox, a track and field star who stood 6'2", practically bowed to help him lift the suitcase. At 11 that night, I turned off my desk lamp to sleep. In the dark, Sterling poked his head down from the top bunk. His voice was just loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Silas, I heard you've been the floor lead for 2 years? That sounds like a lot of work." "Yeah," I replied. "Must be exhausting," he paused. "But I heard the floor lead gets a 10-point boost on their leadership evaluation. Is that true?" "What? We never knew about that." Knox's voice came from the darkness. "Well, who would go around telling people about a sweet deal like that, right, Silas?" Sterling's voice dripped with fake innocence. I didn't answer. He pulled his head back up. After the lights went out, I heard Knox and Miles tossing and turning. Their phone screens stayed lit for hours. I knew those two wouldn't be getting much sleep tonight. The next day at noon, Knox texted me, "Silas, floor meeting tonight." I stayed at the library until 9. When I pushed the door open, all 3 were there. Sterling was lounging in his chair with his legs crossed, scrolling through his phone. Knox and Miles were sitting on their beds, looking like they were ready for an intervention. "Silas is back," Sterling said, putting his phone down. "We were just talking." Knox had an idea that made a lot of sense. "Since we all live here, shouldn't the floor lead position be rotated?" He put a heavy emphasis on the words, "Knox had an idea." Knox kept his head down, his ears turning bright red. He was nervously flicking a lighter over and over. "Yeah," Knox muttered. "You've done it for 2 years, Silas. You've gotten enough extra credit. It's time to give someone else a shot." "I agree," Miles chimed in, sounding like he was reciting a script. "Sterling said universities in Europe and the Ivy League all use a rotation system." Sterling spread his hands wide. "See? 3-1. What do you say, Silas?" He said it like he was reading the weather report, a objective, neutral, and final. I pulled the key to 404 from my pocket and set it on the table. "Fine. It's all yours." My voice was quiet, but Sterling's smile faltered for a split second. I'd ruined his planned follow-up. He was ready to offer me a graceful exit, but I'd just handed over the power without a fight. "Then I propose a schedule," Sterling recovered quickly. "Knox takes the first week, Miles the second, and I'll take the third." "Silas, don't worry about me," I said, pulling out my chair. "I'm not part of the rotation." Knox blinked. "What does that mean?" "Exactly what it sounds like. I'll clean my own area. You guys can rotate the common space." "Fair, right?" Sterling narrowed his eyes. He tapped his finger on the desk twice and smirked. "Fine. We'll respect your choice, Silas." After the lights were out, I heard him whisper to Knox, "See that? Guys like him can't handle losing control. Once you take his power away, he doesn't know what to do with himself." Knox didn't reply, but I heard him chuckle in the dark. Their phones buzzed at the same time. They were all looking at their screens and laughing. I guess they had a group chat now. One that didn't include me. I looked at the key on the table and smiled to myself. I only had one thought. Let them have this crappy job. The first week, it was Knox's turn. As an athlete, he was out for training by 5:30 and crashed as soon as he got back. The most housework he'd ever done was stuffing dirty laundry into a machine, without even using detergent. The first 2 days were okay. On the third day, things went south. When I got back from class, the trash can by the door was overflowing. Takeout containers were stacked 3 high. The top one had leftover spicy Thai noodles, and the red oil was leaking down the side of the bin, staining the white floor tiles. Knox was at the gym. Sterling was there though. He had his AirPods in, playing a game with his feet on the desk. Right next to him was his own empty ramen bowl, and not in the trash, but just sitting on his desk. Knox gets back late, Sterling said without looking away from his screen. If it bothers you, Silas, maybe you could take it out? I ignored him. I walked to my bed, pulled back the curtain, and grabbed my own small trash bin from underneath. I'd bought it myself and used double bags. It only contained my coffee cups and scratch paper. I tied the bag, replaced it, and walked past them. Sterling took one earbud out and stared at me for 3 seconds. Silas, don't you think you're being a bit cold? We're roommates. What's the harm in helping out with the trash? I handle my own mess, I said, placing my bag by the door. That's fair, isn't it? Fine. You're a man of principle, he scoffed and put his earbud back in. He said principle, with the same fake tone he used for his fancy business cards, a shiny on the outside, but paper thin. Knox didn't get back until 11. The trash pile had reached 4 bags by then. The red oil had dried into a dark brown, crusty stain on the floor. He stood at the door and stared for a long time. Damn it, he cursed. He carried 3 bags down to the dumpster. The next day, he did take the trash out, but that red oil stain stayed right where it was. Sterling saw it. He turned to Miles and said, loud enough for me to hear, see? Some people just drop the ball the second they're in charge. When Silas did it alone, this never happened. True, Miles agreed. I leaned down to check under my bed. It was spotless. My new bag was perfectly tucked in. The second week was Miles's turn. He was better than Knox. At least he knew how to use a broom. But he only swept the areas people could see of the middle of the aisle and the entryway. Takeout boxes under the bed? Ignored. Puddles on the balcony? Ignored. Toothpaste stains in the sink? Not his problem. And Sterling? He bought a mini Dyson vacuum. Every morning and night, he'd clean the 1 square meter around his own desk. Then he'd lock it back in his cabinet like it was some top-secret commercial asset. I'm just taking care of my own space, he told Knox, though his eyes were on me. Everyone should clean up their own disasters, right? It was a triple-layered insult. He was saying he was clean, Knox was a slob, and I was ungrateful for his leadership. Knox got the message. He looked over at me, but I had my noise-canceling headphones on. My screen was filled with lines of code. He didn't dare say anything. The third week, it was Sterling's turn. He wasn't cleaning. He was performing. On Sunday night, he walked around with a mop. His movements were grand, but the mop had barely touched the floor. Then he pulled out his phone and took 9 photos. A shot of him sweeping, a shot of him mopping, and several close-ups of the sink. He posted them on social media with the caption, "Dorm life. Cleanliness is my baseline." The likes poured in instantly. Knox commented, "Thanks, boss," and Miles added, "Reliable as always." I didn't even give him a like. I knew his photos carefully avoided 2 spots. The moldy red oil stain on the floor and the stagnant green water on the balcony. He just tilted his camera up half an inch to keep the filth out of the frame. That was Sterling. He didn't care about the quality of the work, only the aesthetic of the post. By the 4th night, I pushed the door open and was hit by a wave of stench. It was a cocktail of smells. Sour, damp mops that hadn't been dried, fermented food scraps under the beds, and the fishy odor of the balcony puddle. It was like a physical punch to the face. Knox was lying on his bed, scrolling. Miles had opened the window, but it didn't help. The wind just swirled the rot from under the beds and made it worse. I walked to the balcony and saw the green water. A grayish-white film was floating on top. I walked back and opened my locker. Sterling poked his head down. "What are you looking for, Silas?" I pulled out a small desk fan I'd bought the week before. I plugged it in and pointed it directly at my bed. I put on my headphones. The world went silent. The next afternoon, Professor Miller, our department head, sent an urgent blast to the group chat. General dorm safety and hygiene inspection tomorrow at 9 a.m. Any room that fails will lose eligibility for this year's scholarships and awards. Knox was the first to freak out. Holy crap, tomorrow. He jumped up and almost slipped on a greasy takeout box. He grabbed the desk to steady himself, looking around the room. His face went paler than it did after a 10-mile run. Miles dropped his book and stared at the crusty red stain on the floor. He swallowed hard. Sterling walked to the balcony door. When he saw the green puddle, his lip curled for a fraction of a second. Then he turned around, his face resetting into a calm mask. But against the backdrop of that sour smell, he was struggling. "Knox," Sterling said, sounding like a manager at a meeting. "Weren't you supposed to scrub that stain ages ago?" "I did," Knox snapped. "I mopped it right after I took the trash out." "Then why is it still there?" Sterling pointed at the floor. "Because someone else spilled something later. It wasn't me." "It wasn't me either," Miles added quickly. The three of them fell silent. Then they all turned to look at me. I was sitting there reading, my headphones still on. I could feel the weight of their stares. Sterling's was heavy, like he was trying to offload a burden. Knox's was desperate, like a drowning man reaching for a straw. Miles's was hollow. "Silas." Sterling walked over. It took him 7 steps to reach my bed. He adjusted his expression with every step. By the 6th step he was smiling. "The inspection is tomorrow. You're the expert at this. Can you give us some guidance?" "Guidance on what?" "On cleaning." Knox blurted out. "You used to handle the whole room by yourself, Silas. You know where the blind spots are." I took off my headphones. I was the floor lead back then. I'm not anymore. Knox's mouth hung open. The words died in his throat. Sterling's smile thinned out. He took another step forward, entering my personal space. "Silas," he said, using my full name for the first time. "Can we not do this? If we fail, it affects everyone in 404. You live here too. Your scholarships will be hit. I won't be affected." He froze. That one sentence hit him like a brick. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. I just looked back down at my book. He stood there, his jaw muscles twitching. It was the last bit of control he had before his mask completely shattered. Then he laughed. It wasn't his usual fake laugh. It was cold. "Fine." He turned to the door and barked at Knox and Miles. "Someone clearly wants to watch us fail. We'll do it ourselves." They spent the night scrubbing until 3 a.m. The sound of mops, splashing water, and Knox's constant cursing filled the room. Sterling spent most of the night on the balcony making phone calls. When he finally came back in, his face was darker than the night sky. The next morning at 9, Professor Miller arrived with 2 student reps. She stood at the door for 3 seconds. Her face went through 3 stages. Neutral, then a deep frown as she saw the floor, then wide-eyed shock at the balcony. She didn't say a word. She put on a pair of rubber gloves and walked in. First move. She reached under Knox's bed and pulled out a takeout container covered in gray fuzzy mold. Second move. She pointed at the balcony. A student rep checked the green water and put a big red X on the score sheet. Third move. She looked at my side of the room. My bed was made. My desk was spotless. My shoes were lined up perfectly. "Silas, did you clean your own area?" "Yes, Professor." She nodded and scribbled something on her clipboard. The inspection only lasted 5 minutes. After she left, the room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Knox was the first to speak. His voice was cracked. "We're screwed." "Is it a formal citation?" Miles's voice was trembling. Before he could finish, Sterling's phone lit up. A notification popped up in the department group chat. "Room 404, failed hygiene inspection. Formal reprimand issued. Scholarship eligibility suspended for the current academic year." The comments under the post exploded. "Isn't 404 Sterling's room? Doesn't he post about how clean he is every day? Oh, the cleanliness is my baseline post is still up. Talk about a cell phone. What a fraud." Sterling stared at the screen, motionless. His thumb kept swiping, looking for a way to undo it. "But you can't delete a public announcement." Half a minute later, he slowly looked up and locked his eyes on me. "It was you." "What? You did this on purpose?" He slammed his phone face down on the desk. His voice rose an octave. "You knew the inspection was coming. You knew we couldn't handle it, and you sat there and watched us fail. You wanted 404 to get cited. You wanted to kill my scholarship." Knox opened his mouth. Miles twisted his fingers together. I put my book down. "Sterling, the day you moved in, you brought up the extra credit for floor leads. The next day, you manipulated Knox into demanding a rotation while you played judge. And on your week, you mopped for 30 seconds and took 9 photos for the gram. Tell me how in the last 3 weeks have you done even 10 minutes of actual work for this room?" His lips moved, but no words came out. "I'm going to see the advisor." He suddenly grabbed his phone and headed for the door. Knox took a step after him. "Sterling, what are you going to tell her?" Sterling stopped at the door and looked back at me. His eyes weren't just angry or panicked anymore. They were calculating. He was like a chess player who had made a terrible move and was frantically looking for a way to cheat. "I'm going to explain the situation," he said. "Just wait." The door slammed shut. Sterling was gone for nearly an hour. When he returned, he didn't slam the door. He pushed it open slowly. Professor Miller was right behind him. His face looked strange. It wasn't defeat or anger. It was like a piece of rusted iron that had been sanded down and the cracks were still there. but the surface was forced into a shine. Sit down, Professor Miller said, pulling out a chair. Knox and Miles sat up straight like soldiers. Sterling came to my office and raised some concerns. She looked at Sterling, her voice as flat as a police report. He claims the hygiene failure happened because Silas was resentful about losing his floor lead position. He says Silas intentionally sat back and watched the room fail as an act of revenge. Knox glanced at me and immediately looked away. Miles stared at the floor tiles. I want to confirm something, Professor Miller turned to me. Silas, did you do this on purpose? No. I simply stopped cleaning up after grown men. She nodded and turned back to Sterling. Sterling, you also mentioned that Silas only wanted the floor lead position for the 10-point GPA boost. You said the fact that he gave up the key so easily proved he was guilty of something. Is that right? Sterling hesitated for a second. Yes. A 10-point boost is critical for grad school applications. He held that position for 2 years. Did you ever bother to ask Silas, she interrupted, if he actually needed those 10 points? Sterling's expression froze. The entire room went cold. Professor Miller stood up and looked at me. Silas. Yes. Do you want to tell them, or should I? I stayed silent for 2 seconds. Then I reached into my drawer and pulled out a heavy manila envelope. The MIT crest was printed in the corner. I didn't open it. I just turned it so they could see the front. It was a full-ride PhD fellowship offer from MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory CSAIL. It came 3 days ago, I said, placing it on the desk. The day before Sterling moved in. The silence was absolute. Somewhere down the hall, a faucet was dripping. Drip. Drip. Like a countdown. The heavy, off-white cardstock of the MIT envelope sat on the grease-stained wood of the desk, its gold-embossed seal catching the gray light of the window. For 3 seconds, the room remained entirely silent, save for the dry, rhythmic drip of the leaky faucet in the hallway bathroom. Then Knox took a step back, his shoulders slumping as his eyes adjusted to the bold, crisp letters, displaying the name of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, SAIL. Miles whispered, his voice carrying the slow, academic dread of a literature major who knew exactly what that acronym meant. That's the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. They only take 12 people globally for the fellowship track. A full ride, Professor Miller said quietly, her pen tapping against her clipboard. And the stipend is funded directly by the National Science Foundation. Silas doesn't need the 10-point floor lead boost, Sterling. He doesn't even need to take his final exams if he doesn't want to. His placement was locked before the semester started. Sterling didn't move. He stood with his hands still resting on the back of his chair, his crisp gray polo looking suddenly too tight around his collar. The perfect styled hair on. His head remained in place, but his face had gone a sickly, curdled white, the color of old plaster. This is an administrative anomaly, Sterling said, his voice flat, carrying the desperate, polished cadence of a student politician trying to rewrite the minutes of a failed meeting. The department didn't notify the student government. As the VP, I'm supposed to receive the registry of all external fellowship offers. You're the VP of the student government, Sterling, not the Dean of Graduate Studies, Professor Miller interrupted, her voice dropping into a cool, flat register that made Knox's ears turn a darker shade of red. The university is under no obligation to share the career trajectory of our top researchers with a business major who spent his last term organizing the spring formal. She stood up, her clipboard clattering against her side as she looked at Knox and Miles. The citation stands, she said, her voice carrying the dry, administrative finality of a court clerk. The scholarship eligibility for Knox Davies and Miles Warren is suspended for the current academic year. If you want to appeal, the forms are in the bursar's office. But I suggest you clean the balcony first. The mold is starting to get into the air vents. She didn't look at Sterling again. She nodded to me, her expression softening by a fraction of an inch. Silas, the department has an open desk in the research annex on the 3rd floor of the engineering building. If you want to move your workstation out of this room before the end of the term, let me know. I'll have the key card authorized. I'll take it, I said, my voice quiet. Good. Have a good afternoon. The heavy fire door of room 404 clicked shut behind her, the latch catching with a clean, metallic sound that felt like the final page of a very long, very tedious book. By 9 o'clock that night, the silence in room 404 had turned into something thick and sour, like the damp mops Knox had left in the corner. Sterling sat at his desk, his mini Dyson vacuum cleaner locked inside his cabinet, his hands flat on his thighs as he stared at his screen. The "cleanliness is my baseline" post on his social media had been taken down, but the screenshots were already circulating through the campus forums. His phone kept buzzing with notifications from the student government group chat. VP Vance, The budget committee needs the final receipts from the Centennial Gala. Why aren't you answering your emails? Sterling, is it true your room got cited for a biohazard? The track coach is asking if Knox is still eligible for the state meet next week. Knox was sitting on his bed, his large, athletic frame hunched over his knees as he stared at his phone. His face was pale, his thumbs flying across the screen, as he argued with someone on WeChat. My dad's going to kill me, Knox muttered, his voice cracking slightly. The athletic department just sent the warning. If the suspension isn't lifted by Friday, I'm off the travel roster for the regional finals. That's 50% of my training stipend gone. My literature scholarship was 30% of my tuition, Miles said from his desk, his voice small, flat, and entirely devoid of his usual poetic cadence. He didn't look at Sterling. He was looking at the crusty red stain on the floor tiles. I had to call my mother. She had to take an extra shift at the library just to cover the late payment fee. Sterling didn't look at them. He kept his eyes fixed on the black screen of his laptop. It's a temporary setback, Sterling said, his voice carrying that smooth, manager-like tone, though his fingers were twitching against his trousers. I'll talk to my dad tomorrow. He's on the board of trustees. He'll have the bursar's office override the suspension. It's just a matter of a few phone calls. Your dad sponsored the gala, Sterling. He didn't buy the health department. Knox said, his voice rising to a sharp, angry register. And what about the live stream? Everyone on the campus forum is calling us the Mop and Bucket Boys. Some freshman from the business school posted a photo of the moldy takeout container with your name written on the tape. I didn't write my name on that tape, Sterling said, his jaw tightening. But you bought the food. Knox stood up, his 6'2" frame casting a long, dark shadow across the aisle between our beds. You're the one who said we should let the trash pile up to test Silas's patience. You said he'd fold within 3 days and clean it himself. He did clean it, Miles whispered, his fingers twisting his literature book over and over again. He cleaned his own half. He just left us with the red oil. I didn't say a word. I was sitting at my desk, my noise-canceling headphones resting around my neck, my screen displaying the parameter logs of my deep learning model. The code was compiling, the progress bar moving steadily at 98.4%. For 2 years, I had spent 30 minutes every morning and night maintaining the common space of room 404. I had scrubbed the sink, wiped the toothpaste stains, and cleared the balcony drain after every storm. I had done it because I liked order, because a clean room meant a quiet mind, and because I had believed we were roommates. But Sterling had shown me that to them, my quiet work was just a sweet deal. A petty 10-point power play they wanted to rotate like a toy. Silas, Knox said, taking a step toward my desk. His voice was no longer angry. It was desperate, carrying the wet, hollow tone of an athlete who had just realized his scholarship was gone. Can you talk to Professor Miller? She likes you. If you tell her it was a joint mistake, that we're willing to do the community service hours. I have a research presentation at 10 tomorrow, Knox, I said, not looking up from my screen. I don't have time to write your letters of appeal. It's just 5 minutes. I said I don't have time. I repeated, my voice quiet, level, and entirely final. The progress bar on my monitor clicked to 100%. Compilation successful. Model saved as Vance_group_fraud_detection_beta.h5. I shut down my laptop, closed the lid, and placed it inside my backpack. I picked up the heavy manila envelope from MIT, tucked it into my side pocket, and stood up. Where are you going? Sterling asked, his eyes dark as he looked at my suitcase. In the corner. The 3rd floor annex, I said. The advisor authorized the key card half an hour ago. I picked up my suitcase, walked past the 3 of them, and pushed open the heavy door of 404. The dry, sour smell of the room followed me into the hallway, but as the door caught and locked behind me, the air turned clean, cold, and entirely free. The 3rd floor annex of the computer science building was a world away from the grease-stained linoleum of the dorms. The floors were made of polished, industrial concrete, the walls soundproofed with gray wool panels, and the air was cold, smelling of fresh solder, new thermal paste, and the dry, quiet hum of 30 server racks running in the basement. I set my workstation up by the window that looked out over the university's Central Plaza. For 3 days, I lived in the lab. I slept on the small leather sofa in the corner, ate takeout from the convenience store downstairs, and spent 18 hours a day refining the neural network I had developed for my senior thesis. My advisor, Dr. Joseph, walked in on Friday afternoon, carrying 2 paper cups of black coffee. The department's annual showcase is next Tuesday, Silas, Joseph said, setting one of the cups by my mousepad. The president of the university will be there. along with the trustees and the representatives from the venture capital firms. They're looking for a project to sponsor for the next academic year. I'm ready, I said, my fingers moving across the keyboard to clear the terminal. I know you are, Joseph said, his eyes scanning the lines of code on my screen. But you should know. Sterling Vance's father, Richard Vance, is the lead sponsor for the business tech track this year. He's already made a substantial contribution to the department's innovation fund. And Sterling has submitted a joint proposal with Knox and Miles, Joseph said, his voice dropping into a lower, more serious tone. They're calling it Vance Group Logistics, an AI-driven distribution network. They've listed you as a former technical consultant on their project abstract. I stopped typing. I looked at the coffee cup, then at Joseph's face. A technical consultant? I asked. Yes, Joseph said. The business school's dean was very enthusiastic about it. He told the president that it's a perfect example of cross-departmental collaboration. He said the project uses the open-source libraries you published on GitHub last semester. The ones I published under the MIT license? Yes, Joseph said. Under the terms of that license, anyone can use the code for non-commercial research. But Sterling is presenting it as a commercial venture. He's claiming they've developed a proprietary algorithm that reduces delivery latency by 15%. That algorithm was my second-year project, Dr. Joseph, I said quietly. It's a simple Dijkstra variation with a custom heuristic. It doesn't reduce latency by 15%. It just drops the ball the second the network size exceeds 10,000 nodes. Joseph let out a soft, dry laugh. I know, he said. I read your second-year report. But the trustees don't know that. They only see the gold embossed business cards and the fancy slides. If they win the sponsorship, Sterling's father will write a check for $50,000 and the student government will run a feature on him in the alumni newsletter. And Knox and Miles? They're listed as the operations team, Joseph said. If the project is sponsored, the university president will override their disciplinary citations as a special administrative exception to keep the project on the active list. I looked out the window at the quiet, gray plaza below. The wind was picking up, throwing a few dry leaves against the double-paned glass of the lab. In my mind, I could see Sterling standing on the stage of the auditorium, his gray polo perfectly ironed, his voice smooth and persuasive as he talked about cleanliness, baseline, and cooperation. Dr. Joseph, I said, my voice flat. Do we have a guest seat for the president of the Rhinebeck Group on the showcase panel? Joseph's eyes widened slightly behind his glasses. The Rhinebeck Group? The venture firm that's currently auditing the Vance Group's municipal contracts. Yes, I said. The managing director, Arthur Vance, is my MIT fellowship supervisor's brother. He's been looking for a reason to pull out of the Vance Logistics merger for 3 weeks. I'll make sure he gets a front row seat, Joseph said, a faint, dangerous smile touching his lips. The Centennial Auditorium was a sea of navy blazers, white silk dresses, and gold embossed folders. System, presentation showcase protocol, active. Vance Group shares have dropped by 1.8% since the morning press release. The city's elite, the trustees, the developers, the old money heirs, mingled under the massive glass roof, their voices rising in a low, polite hum of wealth and power. Sterling stood near the stage, his dark gray suit sharp and immaculate, his cuffs folded with a millimeter's precision. Beside him stood Knox and Miles, both of them wearing the navy blazers of the student government, their faces pale, their eyes darting nervously toward the entrance doors where the department heads were entering. The slides are loaded, Sterling, Knox whispered, his fingers twitching against his trousers as he adjusted his tie. The IT rep said the demo is stable, but he said the system crashed when he tried to run the stress test on the northern delivery routes. It's fine, Sterling said, his voice flat, carrying that cool, concise authority he used when he was playing the leader. We don't need to run the stress test during the presentation. The demo is just a pre-recorded sequence. Anyway, no one's going to ask for the live terminal. Are you sure? Miles asked, his voice small, flat, and entirely devoid of his usual literary confidence. Silas is on the panel. I saw his name on the speaker list this morning. Silas is a student, Sterling said, not turning to face him. And his MIT offer is for next year. Today, he's just another intern in the CS department. My father is sitting right behind the president. He won't let some orphan with a keyboard ruin a $30 million funding drive. At that moment, the doors of the auditorium opened, and the president of the university, Dr. Eleanor Vance, walked in. Beside her was Richard Vance, Sterling's father, a tall, silver-haired man whose face was a mask of cold, patrician arrogance. And behind them, dressed in a simple dark blue wool coat, walked Arthur Rhinebeck, the managing director of the Rhinebeck Group. The crowd immediately fell silent, the guests straightening in their seats as the VIPs made their way to the front row. Mr. Vance, Dr. Eleanor said, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet room. We're very proud of the business school's initiative this year. Your son's project has already received several positive reviews from our external evaluation board. He's a Vance, Eleanor, Richard said, his lips curving into a faint, satisfied smile as he checked his platinum watch. We don't build projects that fail. Let's hope not, Arthur Rhinebeck said, his voice quiet, flat, and entirely neutral. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. System, presentation time remaining, 15 minutes. The Rhinebeck Group's Compliance Committee has just received the encrypted GitHub repository logs. Sterling stepped to the podium, his face illuminated by the soft, blue light of the projector screen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Sterling said, his voice deep, smooth, and carrying that perfect, persuasive cadence that made him the star of every debate. Today we're proud to present Vance Group Logistics, an AI-driven distribution network. Our system uses a proprietary deep learning algorithm to solve the classic vehicle routing problem, reducing transport latency by 15% across the metropolitan area. He clicked his remote. The screen displayed a beautiful, three-dimensional animation of delivery trucks moving along clean, white grid lines, their paths merging into a perfect, flawless pattern of green lights. Our system has been tested under real-world conditions, Sterling continued, his hand gesturing to the screen. Knox Davies managed the operational mapping, and Miles Warren overseen the data integration. We've managed to scale the network to 50,000 active delivery nodes without a single system bottleneck. The crowd applauded, but the applause was cut short. I stood up from the panel seat in the second row, walking to the microphone in the center aisle. Thank you, Mr. Vance, I said, my voice quiet, level, and carrying perfectly through the silent room. But I have a question about the proprietary nature of your algorithm. Sterling's face went completely pale under the blue light of the screen. Silas? The panel questions are reserved for the trustees. I am the author of the open-source libraries you used for your model. Sterling, I said, my eyes locking onto his pale, trembling face. The Dijkstra variation you've listed on page 42 of your abstract was my second-year project. It's licensed under the MIT protocol, which forbids commercial use without the author's written consent. A loud, collective murmur ran through the room. What? Richard Vance stood up, his face turning a deep, angry red. Eleanor, what is this? Who allowed this student to disrupt the presentation? He's a member of the Academic Integrity Committee, Richard, Dr. Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a cold, professional register. He has the legal right to question any project that uses the university's server infrastructure. I clicked my own remote, my tablet wireless link to the main screen. The three-dimensional animation of the delivery trucks vanished, replaced by a raw, gray terminal display. This is the live terminal for the Vance Group Logistics model, I said. The pre-recorded demo Mr. Vance showed you was run under a simulated environment. With only 50 nodes. Let's run the system with the promised 50,000 active delivery nodes. I pressed enter. The lines of code on the screen began to compile, the numbers flying across the terminal with a frantic, erratic speed. Within 5 seconds, the progress bar froze at 12.4%. The screen turned a bright, solid red. Fatal error. System stack overflow. Memory allocation failed at node 1024. Thread terminated with exit code 137. The system has crashed, gentlemen, I said, looking at the principal investors in the front row, because the heuristic Mr. Vance used was copied from a student repository without the necessary boundary checks. It doesn't reduce latency by 15%. It simply stops the ball the second the network size exceeds his father's funding limit. The representative of the Rhinebeck Group, Arthur Rhinebeck, stood up, closing his gold embossed folder with a sharp, final click. The Rhinebeck Group will suspend our investment review for the Vance Logistics merger, he said, his voice flat. And we will initiate a full compliance audit into the company's prior research claims. This presentation is over. The rain in Boston was different from the rain in Oak Haven. It was a soft, steady mist that rolled off the gray slate roofs of the Charles River and smelled of wet brick, river mud, and old stone. I stood by the window of my new office in the CSIL annex on the 4th floor of the Stata Center, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of black coffee. The air inside was cold, smelling of clean concrete, new server racks, and the quiet, uncomplicated promise of a brand new day. My phone buzzed on the wooden desk. It was an email from the university's bursar's office back home. System. Disciplinary review complete. Room 404 citation upheld. Knox Davies's athletic stipend suspended. Miles Warren's tuition fee waiver, cancelled. Sterling Vance's student government status, dissolved. I looked at the screen for a long moment, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. My hands were clean, my code was mine, and the dusty, sour-smelling rooms of 404 were finally buried in the gray winter fog of the past. Behind me, the door of the lab opened, and my new advisor, Dr. Susan, walked in, carrying a fresh stack of research papers. Silas, the deep learning team is meeting in the seminar room at 10, she said, giving me a quiet, respectful smile. The first-year fellows are presenting their initial parameters. They're looking for a lead developer to coordinate the server time. I'm ready, I said. I turned away from the window, my laptop in my hand, my steps light, my chest feeling as wide and strong as the cold river waiting for me outside. The winter was officially over, and for the first time in 3 years, I was completely free.